Session of the Andy Access and Opportunity Learning Lab. This is a joint initiative of Andy East and Southeast Asia and Andy South Asia with the aim of making entrepreneurial spaces more inclusive. Today's session, we are collaborating with the SeedStar, Impact Hub Kathmandu, and GDI. We also have Shamha from UNDP. Then to some housekeeping rules. We request you all to change your Zoom name to pronoun if you would prefer, and organization. If you are having difficulty following the speakers, please turn on Zoom captions and choose your preferred language from the available options. The session in this main room is being recorded. If you wish for us to stop it at any point, please let us know. I hope you are able to see how to enable captions here. For folks who are joining newly, these are broadly the aims of the Access and Opportunity Learning Lab. This is the fourth and final session of the year. So this has been the timeline: governance, need assessment. We have a steady cohort. And then we had 3 sessions. We also did a feedback recently. We'll discuss it towards the end. Today, we will first begin with the session recap of the previous session by Rashi. And then Shamha will set the scene. And Bala will discuss the policy frameworks on disability inclusion. And Tom will discuss the organization practice and ecosystem programs and MERL insights. I let them introduce themselves in detail. With that, I hand over to Rashi.
Thank you so much, Vinita. Okay, so is my screen visible?
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you so much. Once again, thank you so much for inviting us for the recap. I'm not sure if I can fully recap all the wonderful learnings that we had in the last session, but I'll try my best. So the session was on inclusive programming with tangible examples, and I'm representing Impact Hub Kathmandu. I work as a senior programs and research officer. And we had led building entrepreneurial ecosystem models for women entrepreneurs with disability. And this is what our example was based on. But we had 3 organizations that sort of led the conversation based on their expertise. But just setting the foundation for and setting the tone for today is that accessibility is not an afterthought. It is the basic foundation for respect. And Max from STEPS talked about the medical model of disability, where the problem is the disabled person. As you can see, all the arrows are pointed towards fixing the person, or with an assumption that the onus is on the people to change themselves rather than the society in its whole. And then we moved on to the social model of disability, which says, wait a minute, the problem is not the person, but it's rather the systemic barrier that we see around ourselves that is making inclusion a difficult conversation, whether it's about badly designed buildings or inaccessible transportation systems, poor job aspects. It's actually not the the problem of the person, but it's actually the society. So this puts the onus back towards the infrastructure or systemic barriers that we have in the society, which makes this important for this conversation, because this approach is important to promote inclusive participation, applying universal design principles, and implementing equitable policies that benefits everyone, where everyone can thrive to the fullest potential. We also briefly talked about differences between accommodation and accessibility, whereas accommodation is something that is catered towards a specific need or specific person. But accessibility is that broader design approach where not just few demographic or few impairments, but it's a universal design that sees everyone as equal and creates that conversation of accessibility being that that door for everyone to enter in. And one of the key highlights of the last session was that research actually demonstrates that reasonable accommodation costs just less than $500, or 20% reasonable accommodation costs nothing. And this was sort of demonstrated by some lived examples in Impact Hub Kathmandu, where you can see that retrofitting cost us less than $2,000. And we're talking about accessible washrooms, we're talking about spaces that is completely disable friendly. As you can see in the picture, we have our access consultants, and based on the audit that was provided by the access consultant, we had our whole workplace transformed and retrofitted. And the cost actually was not as we would imagine. And we had some examples that was from a short-term period and a long-term program that Impact Hub Kathmandu had done. And basically what a short-term, if you're thinking of doing a short-term program, it does actually become a conversation of accommodation. But here also, this is also not an exhaustive list and can be contextualized according to your own needs. But if you're doing a short-term program for persons with disability, what is the promotion material being used for outsourcing? When we're talking about venue, is the venue accessible, or can an accessibility audit be conducted? When we talk about partners, are you collaborating with access consultants, like shown in the previous picture, or with organizations for persons with disability that actually have expertise in the sector? What kind of audience are we focusing on? When we talk about disability, we do want to cover all sorts of disability, but then are we in the capacity to accommodate everyone, or are we overpromising is something that we have to really focus on. Pre-event sensitization, has the team already been sensitized with information on what to do? Because sometimes, decisions need to be made quick, and there are health hazards as well. So we need to make sure that everyone on the team is equally oriented and has the information that you do. Post-event pathway, is there a clear follow-up after the program? Because most of the times when we work with persons with disability, we're also working with a lot of hopes. We're also working with a lot of frustration. So we don't want to create an environment where, we say we're doing something for a tokenistic approach, but that does not have a sustainable plan afterwards. That just makes our work more shallow. A long-term program, however, would talk about accessibility and that broader design of inclusivity. And we just need to take a step back and think from a hiring perspective, and that becomes a very human resource approach as well. Have persons with disability been considered or hired as a staff? Are they actively working in the workplace? Inclusive communication, again, we're talking about materials that is actively used to outsource maybe participants or staffs or human resources. If we're talking about building that curriculum for persons with disability, whether that be incubation, acceleration, post-acceleration, pre-acceleration, is the curriculum truly embedded in inclusion or not? Accessibility consultant is a huge factor to consider when we're designing a long-term project for persons with disability. Accessibility audit is something that follows after the conversation you have with the accessibility consultant. And again, we need to focus on target audience clarity. Team orientations, as we talked about before, and inclusive budgeting that gives a flexibility for us to actually spend on the areas that need the more focus on. And this was also a beautiful segue into the session that was done by Vinaya from Inclusa, where we talked about inclusive budgeting and what actually is inclusive budgeting. Inclusive budgeting really much focuses on the key principles of participation, transparency, and equity. And really at its core, it talks about fair and representative budgeting that has the voices of all the marginalized and underrepresented groups of the community. Why inclusive budgeting is challenging is because oftentimes there is lack of awareness about inclusion, because really the society is structured in a way that we don't see persons with disability interacting with us on a daily basis, because we're talking about exclusion from even the most basic sectors of life, such as education, transportation, hospitals, and the health sector. So people might generally not be aware that inclusion is actually, a $23 trillion market. Lack of data, whereas we don't know whose needs are being ignored and whose needs should be more focused towards. We also talked about resistance to change, whereas budgeting is oftentimes a top to bottom approach, and we don't really see people actually from the community voicing their needs and that influencing on a very higher level of budgeting. Capacity and resources is also another challenge, because when we're talking about incorporating the voices of everyone, that also takes a lot of skills, that takes a lot of time and funding to do the activities. Then we also segued into accessibility being an expensive thing to add on. Is it a myth or a fact? And it's very interesting that retrofitting and the cost of retrofitting is actually turns to be expensive when it's done later on, when we have to break infrastructure. Whereas if the structures are accessible in design, it's not much costly later on. Hidden costs of doing nothing is its accessibility or inclusion is not just the right thing to do, but it's also the lawful thing to do, because in most cases, non-compliance can lead to lawsuits and forfeits and penalties. And actually, access open source. Accessibility is not as far or out of reach as one might think. As you know, even in this meeting, we have closed captions, and there's a lot of accessibility that is already built on our cell phones. So it's actually not a conversation of how expensive or inaccessibility or out of reach. It's actually a mindset that needs to change. With that, we just want to give a message that accessibility needs to be planned in movement, space, and information, and it needs to be truly intentional and deliberate. And it's not something that can be patched on later as a tokenistic approach. Thank you very much, and very much looking forward to the discussions that are going to be followed.
Thanks, Sachi, for the brilliant recap. To be honest, we are at this moment self-reflecting whether setting up a Zoom registration instead of sharing the Zoom link, whether it was the most inclusive or accessible thing to do. Whether it would have caused inconvenience to the people who are joining through mobile. So this is a process of constant learning. And next, I would like to invite Shamha to set the context.
Thank
Shamha,
you
please
all.
introduce yourself and set the context. I'll share the screen in the meeting.
Just checking everyone can hear me. Thank you all. Thank you, Rashi, for sharing the reflections. And I think that's a good segue to the final session we have is really around, okay, now looking at maybe more upstream, what could be some of the policy frameworks that could foster inclusion. So my name is Shamha Nasir. I work with UNDP's Regional Bureau for Asia and the Pacific as the Gender Equality Specialist. I work specifically within our youth portfolio, so really around UNDP's youth engagement and empowerment and leadership in Asia and the Pacific. So internally, we were also discussing on how to frame this session, and we thought it would be good just to share a little bit around UNDP's inclusion journey, in the hopes that it can inspire some of the participants here today around what could be some of the practical strategies in taking it forward. Of course, UNDP's model is very different. Our architecture is very different. We employ over more than 20,000 employees globally, but really looking at the policy journey and really thinking through what were some of the frameworks in place, how were we able to operationalize it, and what does it mean in terms of tracking inclusion over time. So next slide, please. So for us, UNDP, we are both an employer, and also we have an obligation to meet sustainable development goals across all the member countries that we work with. So for us, it was really a two track approach. One was really looking at inwards, right? Looking at how we as an organization were engaging with our own staff. Were we creating an inclusive environment? Did our staff really felt like they could bring their authentic self to the workplace? Were they able to integrate their lived experiences into the work, into the programmatic work we do? So really looking at it from that lens. And the other track is really on the outward lens, looking at how our programs are be designed, and as mentioned by Rashid from the onset, how inclusive was it? And really thinking around what could be some of the tools and guidance that really can really help to facilitate that. So as I mentioned, I'll just share some of the strategies and practical tools that we have found useful. Next slides, please. So I'll just start with looking inwards. So for us at the policy level, we have a key policy that is the People for 2030 strategy. Really looking at, as I mentioned, how can we ensure that we are able to create a respectful, fair, and inclusive workplace that is free of discrimination and also fosters a culture of speak up culture. And building on this, so the People for 2030 strategy is now in its third version, and each version has been really around looking back, reflecting, and synthesizing some of the insights to really make our People 30 strategy even better. Building on this, we also now have the diversity, equity, and inclusivity strategy that really outlines the DEI goals within the People for 2030 strategy. So we have two of these strategies, and it's now anchored within a DEI committee, because at the HQ level, we also wanted to make sure that there's a committee that can ensure the effective implementation of these strategies and ensure that there are benchmarks that can really monitor the progress of these strategies as well. And the committee really looks at, as I mentioned, what are the DEI principles that needs to be integrated into our internal working strategies, and looking outwards, thinking around what are some of the DEI strategies that needs to be in place in our programmatic work as well. So now we have the architecture, we have the policies, right? Next slide, please, Vinita. Now it's looking at, okay, we have all of these fancy policies and strategies, but do people really feel included? So the first component, it is again looking at the people, our own employees. So we have a framework that's called the UNDP Listen architecture, really framing around how can we foster a workplace aimed at understanding and amplifying our own employees' voices, and really having the capacity, once we get those data, analyze the insights, really having the capacity then to come up with short-term goals and medium to long-term goals. And we have very quick pulse check, that is 2 surveys that are done annually, and these are not long. But the first one is around the engagement share survey, really looking at how our employers feel working as a team, working for the organization at the country level, regional level. We also have another survey, which is the inclusion survey. So as I mentioned, really looking at how do you feel working within your team? Do you feel like your voices are heard? Do you feel like you can bring your authentic self to the workplace as well? So really looking around, do you feel safe? What are the leadership styles of senior leaders? Do you face any harassment, discrimination? And then these data are analyzed, and we try and integrate an intersectional lens to these analysis as well. And then thinking around internally, how can we ensure that our own employers feel included and they can bring their own perspectives into the workplace? Next slide. And then we have very group focused strategies as well. So the main one is the gender equality strategy we have, which is ending this year, and the consultation for the new one is ongoing, really looking at how do we integrate a gender inclusivity lens to our programmatic work, and also how do we within our organization ensure that we move towards gender parity as well. So to complement the strategy, we have a gender parity strategy as well. So really looking at for our own organization, entry level, mid level, senior leadership level, what is the gender parity gap, and what should be some of the strategies that will help us to address this? Is it targeted training? Is it gender and social norms that needs to be addressed? So really, or is it the promotion policies that we currently have in place that needs to be more inclusive? So really looking at from that lens, through the committees that we have in place. Another accountability tool we have is the gender marker tool. So I know Rashi also spoke a little bit about inclusive budgeting. So this is linked to that. So this is to make sure that all our programs include a gender inclusivity lens, both mainstreaming and targeted, and also ensuring that there is a budgetary commitment. So it's one thing to say that we will do outreach, communications through an inclusivity lens, or even facilitation, right, through our trainings. But if we don't have the budget to do that, it comes across as a very tokenistic measure. So how do we move from just having these commitments and vision to actually implementing and operationalizing through an inclusivity lens as well? And while we have the strategy, just to quickly say also at the country level, we are also meant to develop an action plan. So we develop an annual action plan, and we have to report against the progress that is made. So how are we integrating at the policy level? Are our senior leaders, when they make public events, are they integrating gender perspectives, disability inclusion perspectives? When we go and talk to our donors, are we bringing that lens in? So really helping us to walk the talk. Next slide. At the UN level, we also have the United Nations Disability Inclusion Strategy, which takes a three-pronged approach. So again, ensuring that we mainstream disability inclusion in all of our work, and we also bring in a targeted approach. We are also now working towards ensuring that we bring in intersectionality lens. And for example, you may have a young woman with a disability who face compounded barriers in accessing our training programs, in accessing some of the resource materials. So really thinking around then through our program, how can we frame these interventions? How can we financially resource these interventions? And coordination, looking at our entire ecosystem partners we work at the country level. How can we support each other with similar peer learning sessions like this, sharing the resources we have, lessons learned, to strengthen our efforts around disability inclusion? And to complement this strategy, we also have what we call the UNDI strategy survey. So really doing a pulse check around, are we really meeting the ambitions outlined in these strategies? And what we also do is, in addition, we have financial contributions that is also helping our country offices to become more accessible. Physical infrastructure, in addition to capacity building being supported to all our programmatic staff around disability inclusion as well. Next slide. So, and then now that we have the tools, then how does it framed into our programming? I'll just go through quickly. I'm sure many of us know it's mandatory for all of our program to conduct a gender analysis. So even before we start framing any program at the country level, just very quickly taking a pulse check of what are some of the gendered barriers, what are some of the gendered power dynamics that we need to be aware of. For example, when we are doing our trainings, do we need to have separate side events that provide that safe space for women to do consultations? If there's as a result of gender and social norms during our training sessions, do we need to slowly, for example, when we do our climate action work, do we need to bring into our trainings the gendered impact of climate change? That slowly we can start the discussion that the climate change impact is not equal for everyone, and it's depend on several factors, including your gender, age, among other social identity factors. taking it, as I mentioned, taking it further, bringing in that intersectional lens, we have the gender marker that really matches our ambitions with the financial resources. And then we have the corporate requirements that really help us to track the progress we are making, where we need to put in a stronger effort. And also it's internally within corporate different requirement tools, but also to our donors and partners that we engage with as well. And in addition to that, within our programs, we also have technical committees. And what we try to ensure is that to make sure that we have civil society partners, organizations from women's organizations, OPDs, that really help us to frame our work through an inclusivity journey as well. Next slide. In addition to the programmatic work, what we try to do is we also try to support the partners that we work with to make sure that they themselves are making progress towards moving the needle towards gender equality. So this is a program that we have, maybe you've heard of it, it's called the Gender Seal. So we have the Gender Seal that we do for our own country offices, our own offices. We have one that we provide for public institutions, Ministry of Climate Change, Ministry of Gender Empowerment, and also for our private sectors. So really get them to do a self check. We have several benchmarks, pillars, and then get them to develop an action plan, and then really looking at, and then there is, after 1 year, there's a third party validation. And depending on their scoring, they are given silver, bronze, or seal, which is valid for 2 years. And now UNDP has now committed to developing something similar around disability inclusion. So a disability inclusion seal or a disability inclusion marker that will also allow us to tag our financial resources when we do our programmatic work. Next slide. So just to quickly say that we have the policies, we have the operational tools, and we integrate it into our programmatic work. Then what we try to do is also leverage like the challenges we face, the insights, and really look towards supporting our ecosystem partners as well. So we have the Gender Social Norms Index, which really provides that evidence and data around how gender norms continue to be one of the persistent drivers towards gender equality. As I mentioned, again, you can have a capacity building trainings, you can invite women, but if you only monitor on a quantitative lens, but if they do not, even in the spaces that you provide, if they're not able to influence outcome, as a result of gender norms or gender power dynamics, you're not moving towards meaningful disability inclusion or gender inclusion. So really looking around some of the perception indicators and perception challenges we need to address. We also recently launched the LGBTI Inclusion Index, which is a pilot, again, looking around what could be some of the benchmarks for us to integrate inclusivity through this lens. Specifically for young entrepreneurs, while they are starting up their businesses, we also have a gender inclusivity toolkit. Really looking at how can you include policies and practices, very practical. As I mentioned, we are sharing the experience of UNDP, which is a very big organization. But like even if you're starting your own enterprise, there are strategies that can be in place. When you develop your terms of reference, how do you ensure that you are not gender biased? When you do your outreach calls for applications, when you do your social media post, are you thinking about language, the image that you're using? So very simple, practical strategies that can help you really move along this inclusion journey as well. Next slide. This is my last slide. I'm also conscious of time. So reflecting on this, I also wanted to share just a couple of takeaways that I hope will be useful. So leadership commitment is key and has been key for us. So really having a leadership that really promotes inclusion from the get-go and ensures that there are specific policies and strategies in place to complement these policies, ensuring that there is committees, technical committees, advisory committees that really monitor, play that oversight role. Think about what could be some of the markers, surveys that you can have in place to track progress. Again, it can be pre and post service, but really going beyond quantitative data, but looking at it from an inclusion lens. Did your participants feel included? Did they feel like they could shape the outcome? Did they feel like they had the safe space to share their thoughts and some of the challenges that they were facing? And then thinking around within your own ESOs, even what could be some of the indicators, benchmarks, success metrics that you should have. So throughout the course of the year, you can always take a pulse check to see where you are on this journey, and partnering with our women's organizations, OPDs, and also other community-based organizations to ensure that your programs continue to reflect the challenges that communities face, and you are able to provide realistic, practical ways to address these barriers to make sure that the services and programs you're providing are meaningful, lasting, and sustainable as well. Thank you.
If I have 5 minutes to ask Shamha any questions that you might have, this is your opportunity to hear from a global leader.
Vinita, we have two questions from Nevraya in the chat box. Nayara, would you like to, we are a small group, so would you like to kind of unmute yourself, maybe open the camera and ask Shamha questions? Or you want me, or you prefer me to read the questions for Shamha?
I can't show the camera, but yeah, I'm happy to ask the questions. I'll do this very
Okay.
quickly. My question was, I work in academia as well as in research via a think tank. So I want to know how private sector organizations can engage directly with Shama's work in Pakistan.
Sure. In Pakistan, we have UNDP Pakistan Country Office. As I mentioned, they do a lot of work across the different development issues, youth empowerment, gender equality, co-governance. I would be happy to introduce. So usually the official method, one method would be we have our own procurement process that really looks for partners to engage with us in the different development areas that we're hoping to address. The second option is that you could always reach out to our colleagues and explore what could be an opportunity for collaboration. Within country offices, we also have an economist team that really looks at the macroeconomic data and really think around how could we address some of the knowledge gaps to facilitate some of the barriers that are leading to inequalities in country context as well. So I'm happy to link you up with our UNDP Pakistan colleagues if you would like.
That would be great. Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Does anyone has any final questions for Shamha before we move on to the next speaker? Feel free to. You have 8 seconds to do so.
Just to also say, colleagues, I mean, I'll share with Pop also some of the resources I mentioned, and more is available through our website as well.
If there is no further questions, back to you, Vinita.
Thank you, Shamha, for giving that overview and for offering to share the resources. We'll share it with you as part of our toolkit, which we will discuss later. Next, we have an organization that practices this inclusive programming, and we can hear about what is the toolkit that they are using from Bala Nagendran from Global Disability Innovation Hub. Over to you, Bala. I will share the screen when you introduce you.
Thanks, Vinita. Hi, everyone. Yeah, feel free to share the screen. I can maybe quickly do a quick introduction and then start with the slides. Hi, everyone, again. This is Bala. I'm currently based in India, and I'm an inclusive climate researcher with the Global Disability Innovation Hub. The Global Disability Innovation Hub itself is based in London, UK, and I'm working from here. My background is in architecture, urban development, and climate action. I have over 5 years of experience engaging with local governments, climate action actors in implementing diverse range of projects, primarily focusing on urban development. So in this presentation today, it's going to be a little different from probably what the previous speaker had mentioned. Like, I'm going to focus mostly on the projects that we are doing, but with multiple actors. So the kind of policy frameworks that we are recommending to different climate actors and different city actors through our work. To give a very quick introduction to GDA Hub, next slide, please. Yeah, the Global Disability Innovation Hub accelerates ideas into impact for a more just world for disabled people and all people. As I mentioned, we are based in London. We have a very unique setup. So we are a academic research center and also a community interest company, which kind of allows us to rapidly translate research into practice. We also have a lab very much present in the London Olympic Park, from where we operate right now. We can read more about our work right now from Disability Innovation Strategy for 2030. And our work also kind of spans across multiple things, starting from growing new technologies and ecosystems, specifically targeting on assistive technology, and also sharing knowledge, pioneering research and disability inclusion. And we mostly look at scaling innovation. So we work in partnership with multiple countries, and then we look at scaling innovation for assistive technology. Next slide, please. We also run the flagship program called AT 2030, which is Assistive Technology 2030, which is a program funded by the UK International Development. So we have reached 10 million people directly through this program in the last 8 years, and we have reached 54 million people indirectly. And we have run this program for over with over 60 countries, and 54 countries are currently implementing our ideas from this program itself. And more specifically, as I mentioned, our operation is primarily through partners. We work with assistive technology innovators, businesses, and also organizations of people with disabilities, local think tanks, architects, and urban development practitioners, city governments, etc. So that's how we have reached such a vast majority of the community who's looking for disability inclusion right now. As I also mentioned, our work is very much rooted to academic research. So we have also published over 200 journal articles and influencing papers. So if you are keen to learn more about assistive technology and how that impacts people with disabilities and how it also kind of empowers people with disabilities, you can look into our website for our research papers also. Next slide, please. Rashi gave a very good recap of what you kind of saw in the previous sessions. That also gave me a clear understanding that you already have a very good foundational learning on disability inclusion, from medical model to social model, and what accessibility and accommodation would look like. But I just kind of want to highlight two things. One, a lot of times our perception on disability is kind of restricted to visible impairments. Our thinking kind of goes directly to ramps and people on wheelchair. Or even, let's say, if you think of someone with visual impairment, we would think of only someone with a glasses and a stick. We wouldn't really think of someone, let's say, with a guide dog. So the way we look or imagine people with disabilities and the kind of accommodation they require is also quite limited to our own experiences. So just wanted to highlight the diversity of disabilities, starting from based on vision, hearing, mobility, cognition, and also impairments related to self-care, like if a person is able to make the basic payments, dressing, etc. by themselves. It could also relate to communication. It could be related to affect, having anxiety and depressed feelings over a longer period of time. It could also relate to upper body functioning, pain, and fatigue as well. So when you think of disability, think of diversity. Disability can't just be restricted to a few visible impairments that we probably have seen more commonly across our society. And also we are looking at a larger, I would say disabled people are the largest minority in the world. We're talking about 16% of global population being disabled. But the problem again here is we aggregate that number to kind of show the strength, to show the need to act now. But that doesn't mean that all of them have the same requirements or accessibility needs. So it's important that we recognize them as an aggregated community. At the same time, we also recognize their individual and diverse needs and requirements as well. Next slide, please. So I'm going to speak about three projects or programs that we are running right now. As I mentioned, my background is primarily in architecture, urban development, and climate action. So I'm going to speak about three programs to kind of relate to that and what kind of frameworks that we use to change policy direction in each of those kind of programs. The first one is inclusive cities. So we have a inclusive city vertical within our work where we focus on accessible infrastructure for people with disabilities and for everyone. So we completed 6 city case studies in the last 4 years, primarily in low and middle income countries. We have done in India, Indonesia, Africa, even in Russia, and one in also Colombia. So based on all of those case studies, we also have come up with the Global Action Report, which proposes 10 principles and 16 action areas for city governments to work on inclusive cities. So this first framework I want to speak about is the People Policy Practice Framework. So our recommendation to city government or anyone who's practicing in an urban context is to think from this lens. So before they think about inclusive cities, we want them to think from the perspective of people, policy, and practice, and do an analysis across all the three verticals to kind of like come up with their solution. And also how we frame inclusive city is also a place where the built environment, infrastructure, and services are planned and designed to accommodate and empower everyone who lives there. So the Global Action Report, as I mentioned, is equipping cities with practical actions to accelerate accessibility and inclusion in their physical infrastructure, buildings, services, and operation. I just want to kind of like highlight a couple of things in this diagram. Starting with the people component. Often, as I mentioned, like we consider people with disabilities as like one bucket, and our thinking also kind of was limited to only like a few visually like recognizable impairments. But when we say people with disabilities, sometimes we also mean older people who may not really recognize themselves as people with disabilities. They may have like visual impairments because of age, but that's not something that they're going to like report actively. As at the same time, like some cases, let's say, especially when we work in contexts like Africa, what we also realize is disability is so stigmatized that reporting is very much low. So we also have to work with organizations of people with disabilities rather than directly being able to reach people with disabilities themselves, because it's very tricky for us to kind of engage and have a conversation openly. So when we say the people, we mean all of them. And in the outer layer, you also would see the other marginalized communities, including urban poor, migrant workers, tourists, refugees, religious groups, pilgrims, caretakers. So we also want to kind of put a stress on the caregivers part, because even they may have specific needs in terms of how their everyday life is kind of revolving around their caregiving responsibilities. So when you speak with people with disabilities, it's also important to take that perspective as well. So yeah, this is the first framework I want to mention. So it's a very simple one. So when you think about disability inclusion in any context, think about the perspectives of people, think about the perspectives of policy, and also the practice, and bring all of them together when you try to look at the solution. Next slide, please. The next one is a quite interesting one. So the first one, as I mentioned, was a local government, more public sector oriented one. The second one is our current work with the Transforming Energy Access platform. So we are offering something called the Disability Support Service. So Transforming Energy Access platform, again, is funded by the UK International Development, which has over 200 partners, a combination of like energy researchers, energy innovators, energy businesses, and also like other energy actors, especially like utility agencies, local governments, etc. So we work with these partners to ensure the needs of people with disabilities are integrated in their energy transition programs and policies. So how we are doing that is like the first question we tell them is, first question we kind of ask them is, what is the role do you imagine for people with disabilities in your work? So this is the kind of 5 layered pyramid that we have. So we ask them to think from each of those perspectives. Can you bring in people with disabilities as leaders for your program? Can you bring in them as like employees? Will you be able to recognize people with disabilities as your consumers? Or can you like empower them to be entrepreneurs? Or at least will you be able to like include them as community members equally to participate in consultations, focus groups, etc. So kind of like giving them the right position and kind of like giving them the role in the larger program also kind of expands the thinking of actors across any sector. Like this is the energy value chain example, but I would say that this may probably also work for other sectors where you have to kind of bring that conversation in. So the first step we say is to recognize and include people with disabilities across the value chain but then it could also start from any of these one roles. More specifically, we always encourage that once you recognize people with disabilities as equal consumers, you kind of bring things together, because once you know that you have to also cater to the needs of people with disabilities with your products and services, you also will start thinking how your entire system can accommodate people with disabilities as employees and entrepreneurs as well. So that's a big opportunity that we kind of try to unlock. But what we also kind of see as a challenge in such an approach is a lot of times people with disabilities won't come up as the priority group for action, because the consultations never really have people with disabilities. So example, they kind of like consciously include women, they consciously include migrant laborers, consciously include even rural communities. But in all of those areas, they kind of like miss out on disabled people. So even they don't really come up as priority group in their thinking. So that's something we also try to address simultaneously when we apply this framework. So yeah, that's the second one. And the third one, can you go to the next slide, please? The third one is an emerging area for us. This is more related to local climate action. So the kind of change I would say happening here is one, this kind of happens at the intersection of cities, also the private sector, because local climate action is a space where even the cities can play a very stronger role. And we also see that communities and corporates are playing a stronger role as well in the local climate action. So we have like established broadly like 3 guiding principles. This comes from the background that by 2050, over 1 billion people with disabilities are projected to be living in cities. And we all know like cities are the hotspots for climate action and climate impacts as well. So that's the reason why we need to work and act in cities. And our cities are also investing so much money for climate action. It's an opportunity like for us to also fix accessibility. Like Rashi was mentioning, like it doesn't take so much money for us to fix accessibility. So when you're going to, let's say, invest your money to implement a new let's say a green park or a nature-based solution in your city, it also makes utmost sense for you to fix the ramps and other accessibility requirements along with that, so it doesn't become a separate project, but actually you are integrating inclusion and resilience as one project. So that's the kind of narrative that we are leading in this space. So the guiding principles that we operate with are first, positioning people with disabilities as equal right bearers, because a lot of times what we see in these plans happening is people with disabilities are considered as beneficiaries or stakeholders or vulnerable groups or informants, but not necessarily as equal citizens or equal right bearers. So that's the kind of first foundation we want to establish. The second one is, I already spoke about diversity. So not think about people with disabilities as one homogeneous group, think about diversity. And second is intersectionality, specifically intersectionality, because even the even like the actors who speak about gender inclusion sometimes miss about women with disabilities. So we don't want that to happen. So it's important that we bring the intersectionality lens across our work. And finally, intergenerational equity, because people with disabilities who are born in 2000 will actually like experience less natural disasters compared to the ones who are going to be born like now or later. So it's also important that how we maintain that intergenerational equity. And finally, we want this not to be just limited to the actors who are already working in climate action and disability inclusion, but it has to be a whole of society approach where everyone recognizes these requirements. So the framework really here is threefold here, looking at participation, planning, and practice. So participation is something we would have heard from others as well about direct and equal engagement opportunities and giving the kind of tools and accessibility requirements that's necessary for people with disabilities to contribute equally. So that's the first part. The second thing is planning. So how we differentiate that is a lot of times, like example, even like if we consider like a city government or a private actor, they may have like a good intention and they will organize like a participatory workshop, but the workshop's logistics would be accessible, but the tools not necessarily would be accessible. We would still be talking about the same maps, the same kind of GIS tools, etc., which not necessarily being perceivable for someone with a visual impairment for matter. So also, how do we make our planning mechanisms itself, methodologies itself more inclusive? So that's a second component, and we are developing some tools on that front. And finally, about practice, because most of the barriers, especially the physical barriers for accessibility, could be resolved with better maintenance. like if you go to our street right now, like at least from the place where I am right now, like from India, I would say 60% of the barriers could be removed just by maintaining the streets the way it is. But majorly, that's the challenge. So we also look at factors from a perspective of budget, resources, and other operational mechanisms for monitoring and evaluation. So yeah, so these are the kind of three project areas I wanted to quickly introduce. And if you'd like to know more about these three projects, if you go to the next slide, I also have provided the QR codes for all the three reports, so which will give you like a much detailed information about all of the things. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bala, for this informative session sharing various frameworks. Now, if you have any queries, we have a few minutes.
We have a questions from in the chat from Nayara. She asks, if you had any kind of success story with regard to overcoming stigma. Yep.
Yeah, I can maybe mention an example, not necessarily related to the projects that I spoke about, but we also have a separate sub-program where we look at using sports as a way to resolve stigma and overcome stigma. So we engage very closely with para-Olympians to ensure that their messaging gives the right kind of like understanding on disability. And also like we specifically, let's say, promote Paralympics in African regions to ensure that people with disabilities have the opportunity to like step out and then be part of the larger sports community, which itself could be like a chance for them to socialize and equally participate in their community. So that's like a separate sub-program. You can also read a lot about that in our website.
I also had a question. Yeah, so Bala talked about the inclusive city research. So if I'm not sure if we've done already for Nepal, but if we were to, how would we invoke the process of maybe conducting a research as such? Or maybe if anyone else is interested, how do we sort of get engaged in that research from our own country perspective?
Sure. So the twofold answers to that. One is we have that global action report that kind of gives a overarching idea of which are the areas which is critical for people with disabilities. We have done our research very much on lower and middle income countries. So I would say it would be relatable to Nepal, but then of course not really like bespoke for Nepal's needs. We have to do our own research there. That's one part of it. The second component is while we have done that research, we are also now working on a 2-year program in Addis Ababa. So we are actually creating an inclusive city action plan, very much targeted only for Addis Ababa, to understand what that level of methodology will look like. So our hope is that by the end of 2027, we would be able to share that methodology with a wider audience. So the respective cities who are interested would be able to kind of like adapt and then develop their own inclusion action plan.
Any final questions, comments, or anything anyone wants to share?
Moving on to Tom then. Tom is also the co-chair of the Access and Opportunity Learning Lab. And he represents the Seed Stars, and they have a wonderful program for entrepreneurs with a disability. He will be sharing his experiences from there. Tom, while you introduce yourself, I can pull up the screen.
Thanks, Vinita. I hope my audio is coming through all right, right? Yes,
Yes,
perfect.
it is.
All right. Good afternoon, good evening to all of you. Thank you so much for having me over. It's very hard to kind of follow up after Bala, Rashi, Shama, and the others. I mean, we've been talking a lot about what they've been doing. So the intent of what I want to spend the remainder of my time here is to share some of the things that we have done at SeedStars. So I'm Tom Sebastian. I work as the regional director for SeedStars. SeedStars, for many of you who don't know, we are a venture capital organization. We invest in early stage startups across emerging markets. We have mobilized over $1 billion in the market so far, have about 8 funds. We also work as ESOs. So we implement programs where we are supporting entrepreneurs across different emerging markets as well. Vinita, when you're sharing my screen, I'm seeing like partial bits of the information on my screen. Is it, maybe just go to the next slide. Let's see if it comes up all right.
It's not visible for me.
No, okay. Could you just go to the next slide, please?
Yeah. Is this okay?
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, fair enough. I think this is fine. We'll stay here, right? Okay, so let's start with one thing I want to share with you when I started my career at SeedStars quite many years ago, right? I remember somebody coming to me in a conference and asking on how do you really design programs for women, youth, or persons with disability? Now, this was much before SeedStars even ventured into working on a program with persons with disability. So this question, I remember pausing at that point of time, thinking of what an answer could be. And a very crude answer came into my mind, which wasn't elegant. And the answer was basically, you don't design programs for types of people. You design them for the barriers that stop them. Right? It took me many years to really understand what this meant. And that's what inclusion, and that's what inclusion kind of represents in my head as well, right? Because at that time, like many of us, I thought inclusion basically meant let's support women, let's support youth, let's support persons with disability. But I had a rude awakening, and this happened about 1.5 years ago. That's what led to the creation of a program called Seed Inclusivity, which I will talk about in a few slides, which supports persons with disability. And I remember this young founder, and this was in Hyderabad, that happened in India. This young founder came up who was disabled himself, and he told me something that changed my entire perception about inclusion. He said, don't support me, change the room I walk into, right? It was such a powerful statement. I'll say it again. He said, don't support me, but change the room that I walk into, right? And that's what rewired all our understanding of inclusion. It's not about helping people, right? Anybody can help people. You can create programs that help people, but it's about really fixing the system so that everybody, regardless of gender, disability, geography, income, identity, everybody can participate fully and fairly. That is what inclusion is. So what I'm here today is to basically share how SeedStars really designs systems that are not just inclusion in theory, but inclusion in practice, right? Across our organizations, our programs, and also how we measure ourselves. So when we talk about inclusion, like I said, we talk about all underrepresented communities. Shama, Rashi, and Bala, they spoke about different segments of people, and which is right. What I'm trying to say is inclusion goes beyond that as well. Right? It talks about inclusion, in my mind, also incorporates rural founders, low-income entrepreneurs, migrants, disabled founders, women, youth, neurodiverse founders, caregivers. And there's this complex web of intersectionality between all of them, right? Which further augments itself as the situation being worse. A man with a disability is a lot higher in getting access to things than a woman with a disability, right? And so when you start looking at intersectionality between this, and now add a rural angle into it, a rural woman with a disability is far lower on the scale in getting access to things. So that's why I said, so when you think about inclusion, think about the whole spectrum, right? And so, apologies, just got another call, so it kind of moved. So when we think about our ecosystems do not suffer from a talent shortage. Let's be very clear about that. They suffer from an access problem, which is disguised as a talent shortage, right? So when we introduced from a SeedStars perspective, what we did was our application process to our cohorts, right? Our incubators, accelerators. We introduced an option of a video application option. right? Not just sending pitch decks or writing complex documents, but just we said, just send us a video application. We suddenly saw a 22% rise in women from low-income communities that started applying to our programs. When we started making our pitch rooms accessible with captions, just like today's call, with captions, flexible scheduling, persons with disabilities, their participation increased, right? When we switched our evaluation technique from pitch strength to basically, do customers really want this as a product? Suddenly, we started seeing founders who were pretty much invisible popping onto our screens, right? So inclusion is not about diversity optics. It's about discovering the talent your system was preventing you from seeing. I'll give another example, right? And I was in Cambodia just a couple of weeks ago. I remember in a pitch session, one of the fellow judges, I was a panel on a jury. One of my fellow judges asked me saying, Tom, this Cambodian entrepreneur, I think it's a great product, but the pitch was really weak. And you know why the pitch was weak? Because she did not know English very well, right? So of course, grammatically, she made mistakes. She stuttered on stage. But is that what we're trying to judge when we're thinking about a pitch? That's theater, right? A very good actor on stage will come across as an amazing entrepreneur, right? So we need to remember inclusion is kind of uncovering those kind of topics, uncovering those barriers that are in front of us when we are designing programs and working with people. Next slide, Vinita. Right? So at SeedStars, for us, inclusion, we've really adopted it within our programming. So we think of it across 3 layers. So internally, how we hire, how we build culture, how we make decisions. Externally, how we design our programs, our tools, our support for entrepreneurs across 90 plus countries, and even how we monitor and evaluate and learn in real time, right? So for us, internally, when you look at it, there is one thing that our CEO told us was very, very interesting. He said, you cannot run inclusive programs if your internal systems replicate exclusion. I know it's a lot of words, yeah, but just try and understand it a little bit. If you are trying to be, if your systems replicate an exclusionary attitude, you cannot be inclusive. So what we started doing is just looking at ourselves first. So even our hiring, right? We removed the pedigree bias. We said no more filtering on fancy schools, no more big brand names that we want to hire. Let's let talent from underserved regions actually enter our organization, right? So we started becoming more open in our hiring process. We created a global hiring panel. So every candidate is interviewed by people from different regions. So say I recently had a panel which was from Lagos, Sao Paulo, Manila, Cambodia. All of them came together and they interviewed the candidates. So when perspectives are diverse, the bias also goes away, right? We introduced the standardized salary bands because, I mean, I'm a man, so I can afford to say this. Men sometimes are very forceful. So we say, I want XYZ when you want the negotiation process. Women tend to hold back on that negotiation, right? So we remove that entire negotiation from the equation. Why? Because negotiation is often where gender and social inequality re-enters the process, right? And lastly, what we did was we introduced a rotating meeting facilitators model. So this might seem small, right? But the impact is quite large. When you have junior women from emerging markets starting to lead discussions in panels, in our interview evaluation, creativity, ownership, and psychological safety is tripled, right? So your internal culture is your blueprint for external programs, right? Fix that culture and inclusiveness becomes natural instead of it becoming theater, as I talked about earlier, right? So start with yourselves first, right? And that's what we did. Next slide, please. From an external perspective, what we started looking at doing was basically looking at saying, how do we make our programs, more in terms of more accessible, flexible schedules and going forward, right? So from our evaluation perspective, what we did was we learned 3 big perspectives, 3 big lessons. First, we introduced a structured scorecard model. And in this structured scorecard model, what we basically said was that we want to now select people instead of a pitch, like I said earlier, instead of it being theater. We said we will move to more evidence, right? So we're not rewarding pitches, but which basically rewards confidence, but we are rewarding competence. Because of this evidence-based scorecard in our structured evaluation, the selection of the women-led startups rose by 31%. Right? We said we want to remove the reviewer bias. So we had blind reviews. So when our judges, our jury would get the startups, they were without names, no photos, no unnecessary backgrounds. That removed a reviewer bias and immediately increased the agreement between evaluators. Very simply, we also said the format friction also excludes a lot of rural founders. So we started allowing things like text, voice notes, videos into our application process, and suddenly rural completion rates doubled. Right? This is important for you to remember. So we worked with entrepreneurs from Fiji. In Fiji, the biggest issue is people don't have internet connectivity always. They don't have, because of the typhoons that happen, the monsoons that happen a lot, the environment is such that it does not allow connectivity. So you need to be flexible to allow founders, if you want from such regions to come in, you need to allow them methodologies and technologies that are flexible for them to use, right? So what you need to think about is, if your evaluation rewards confidence over traction, you're not selecting excellence. You're basically selecting privilege. Right? And I come from that privilege. I've studied in an English school, so of course I will speak very well. But think about another person from India who's probably from a rural background, but has a stellar idea, but cannot communicate as effectively as us in the language of the Queen. Right? Suddenly, without knowing, you would judge them as not being good enough. That happens to all of us, right? So it's important to start thinking about changing that perspective. So change the tool and you change who gets discovered in your programs. Okay, so that's also another factor about inclusion. So next slide, please, Meeta. So this, what you see on screen, is our first cohort of our Seed Inclusivity program. So our Seed Inclusivity program was basically our first program where we worked fully with founders with disabilities and founders who are leading assistive technology companies. This was a big shift for us. Right? We did not know how to start programming, but we eventually figured it out. Our program manager that we brought on board had a personal motive here as well. He was deaf himself, right? So he knew the challenges. So bring somebody with lived experiences into your programs, and suddenly you will discover the aspects of what you can actually provide those entrepreneurs, right? So in this, we ran this for 6 months. We're now in our second cohort of what we are running. And it's important that you need to think about this. Founders with disabilities, and I'm now hyper-focusing on one particular segment, right? Founders with disabilities don't need lighter expectations. You don't need to, give them a kid-gloved approach. You don't need to, treat them any different, right? They just need a level playing field. That's all. Because then they have a chance to be able to shine and show you what they really have. Next slide, please. And we were quite surprised, because this, what you see on screen, is the outcome of what happened with cohort 1, right? We had 15 companies that were led by and for persons with disabilities, right? There's a QR code here that you can check, and it should give you an understanding of, it'll give you to the report, it'll take you to the report. But what we observed is, in 6 months of programming with these founders, these 15 companies generated $3.4 million of revenue, new revenue. Right? They raised 12.8 million of investments from the program. They created over 1,100, almost 1,200 jobs. They supported 6,400 SMEs. They impacted almost 750,000 people and persons with disabilities. And more importantly, they reached 2.97 million people in 6 months, ladies and gentlemen. Right? This surprised even us. We did not expect this. So this shows what happens when you start giving founders who have traditionally been excluded an opportunity with a level playing field. Right? It changes the game completely. Next slide, please. So think about, one of our biggest breakthrough for us was, demographics tell you who people are, barriers will tell you what they need. So design for the barriers, and that will create a whole new program for you. So for instance, if there's a connectivity barrier, like I said, in Fiji, right, where there's rural bandwidth, WhatsApp, Telegram. That's how the learning would happen. Participation went up 40%. If there's a network barrier, women founders, they often lacked a lot of investor access. How do we overcome it? Create the warm intro days. We ensured that there were over 140 plus investor matches in one of our programs. If there's a confidence barrier, right? Founders were found to be underpricing themselves. We introduced clinics where we helped them understand pricing, and we saw that their contract values increased by 18%. If there's an accessibility barrier, deaf founders or auditory challenged founders were traditionally excluded. We started in our programs to pay for interpreters to come on, captions to be introduced, full participation unlocked, right? This approach avoids stereotyping communities and focus on systems, right? So don't design for people, design for the barriers that shape their existence, right? One simple thing I want to mention here, even the way we would present our slides has changed. Right? Earlier, we would have this whole McKinsey style, big graphs, a lot of numbers. We're VCs at the end of the day. We love numbers, right? So we would present our data that way. And often when I would present on stage, I would say, look at this graph behind me, and then I would give information about it. But suddenly imagine you're speaking to a person who cannot see, and you're presenting this information. You say, look at this graph. That, ladies and gentlemen, is very, very insensitive. We never realized that until we bought on somebody who had that lived experience, who told us saying, if you're asking me to see something, I can't see anything at all, right? If you're sending me a video and asking me to go through it, the video does not have the metadata that plays with my screen reader to help me understand what that video is about. Everything changes when you have to bring in inclusion into play. But if you do it once, you can ensure all your programs are inclusive going forward. Next slide, please. Right? So those are the kind of changes. So for you to understand what changes to be made, Google for something called the WCAG compliance, right? Because that will help you understand a large part of how to get your tech platforms become more compliant for persons with disability. Have auto captioning that kind of helped a lot of non-native English speakers as well as deaf founders, right? We started creating offline modules for founders with unstable internet connections. And that ensured that dropout rates reduced. Right now, we are facing an issue in Cambodia, where I'm running a program right now. Thailand and Cambodia have a war going on. And we just got to know yesterday that Thailand has bombed one of the borders of Cambodia. We've got a company sitting in that border right now that's part of our cohort. And how do we deal? We have a session today that we're delivering. How can we of course, we can't ask the person to come in. That is inclusion. We have to be prepared with inclusion to cater to such unknowns as well. So it's not just about disability or women or youth. It's also about uncertain circumstances that brings inclusion into play, right? So for us, offline modules help. Having support ecosystems help, right? And ensuring that when we're running cross-geography platforms or cohorts, we don't ask people to dial in at 1 a.m. in the morning just because the speaker is sitting in New York, right? Ensure that you can understand that people are sitting in different geographies and codify your programs to address those needs, right? Andy, for instance, operates, their headquarters is in the US, but a large part of their teams are across the world as well. So if you have to have one of the speakers from the US come in, it's inaccessible even for the speaker and for the people attending it if you ask them all to come on the same time zones. Right? So you need to be thinking on different ways of bringing accessibility as a standard into your programs. It's not an optional anymore. Okay? Next slide, please. So I know I'm going on about information, but I'm hoping each slide gives you one tidbit of information that you can use as you go forward, right? In our programs, we don't think about mentorship as basically pairing people on a spreadsheet. We bring in people with specific lived experiences to help people or help founders from different regions. For instance, if we are working with persons with disability, we bring in another expert, another entrepreneur who is a person with a disability, who's built a business successfully. We had to find such an expert to be brought on board our network. And that's who we paired. Women founders basically preferred mentors who would coach them on negotiation instead of just another marketing mentorship. So we started matching people based on what they need. And that's why in our proposals, when we send to our clients as well, we would not put out a ready list of mentors anymore. We used to, but rather we make it very clear to our donors that we want to match our mentors based on the actual needs of the entrepreneurs themselves. So once we know our cohort, we can provide our donors with those mentors. So don't be afraid to also tell your donors that you are bringing inclusion in with a perspective of ensuring that everybody gets what they need, and it's not just political theater for you in one sense, right? We also ensured that our mentors were able to understand and get more inclusive support, because now we had different kind of mentors coming on board. So we have a mentor video, a 10-minute video, which basically ensured that they come on board, understand our framework, understand our methodology. And these kind of little hacks that we did really increase the satisfaction of the mentor-founder engagement. Right? Next slide, please. So the unfortunate thing I see in many of our programs is also that people, at the end of a cohort, everything ends. You take great cohort demo day pictures and everybody says bye and that's it, right? Is that what's needed? If you are an entrepreneur, think of it yourself. You'll spend 6 months of your life working with an accelerator program. Your life does not end there. Your challenges still remain, right? But for the accelerator program, it's over with one donor program, move on to the next. Over with one cohort, move on to the next, right? I think that's a big flaw, and that really affects people when you're thinking about from an inclusion perspective. Start thinking about creating what we did at SeedStars is we have this 3-month, 6-month, 12-month follow-ups, post-program support that comes in. We've created alumni groups where we're constantly in touch. We ensure that there's a constant peer-to-peer support. One of the biggest challenges we understood is a CEO or a founder, when he or she goes through a mental breakdown, it's not easy leading a company. They feel most insecure telling that they are exhausted, that they are feeling depressed, that they are feeling helpless, because the CEO or the founder is expected to be superhuman after all. Yeah? Investors want to see a superhuman founder. Your employees want to see a superhuman founder, superhuman CEO. But at the end of the day, they're human as well. So our peer-to-peer network, we found that it's an amazing wellness group as well, where a CEO can talk to another CEO and saying, hey, I'm feeling absolutely helpless. I'm talking to 150 investors. Everybody's saying, no, I don't know what to do. I don't know how I'll pay my employees in 3 months. Help, right? Those sort of minuscule conversations is also inclusion. It's also allowing participation, right? So inclusion goes much beyond things that you're currently thinking about right now. Next slide, please. So this is another program that we have. It's called the Women Entrepreneurs for Africa. So we ran this across, it ended in 2023, but we saw impressive results from this as well. So we were supporting women and youth. We saw the number of employment for both women and youth increase dramatically. We saw 306 jobs being created. But more importantly was that the cohorts raised about $7.2 million worth of financing. This I just put this on here, not to gloat, but to say that supporting women and youth and persons with inclusion needs shows investors that there's a need and that there's a real potential in investing in those markets. And if you give support to these stakeholders, you will see great results. Right? Next slide, please. So from a MERL perspective, very quickly, when we talk about it, in most organizations, basically use MERL to explain what happened last year, right? It's useful if you're writing a report. Not so useful if you're trying to stop exclusion while it is happening. So we use MERL as an early warning radar, right? We saw women dropping out between weeks 4 and 6. MERL told us that this coincided with caregiving peaks. We adjusted the timing, added a confidence module, retention rebounded for us, right? In our disability cohorts as well, we saw disabled founders underperforming in certain assignments. Our MERL module helped us realize it was a format issue and not an ability issue. That came into play, and we changed the design of how we gathered information. Performance came back to normal, right? One question weekly pulse surveys helped identify fatigue and confusion before it became into a dropout issue. So our current MERL dashboards show where founders are slowing down, right? Are they slowing down in fundraising, customer acquisition, pricing, hiring? And it tells us where to tweak our program. So MERL shouldn't tell us or tell you what happened. It should tell you what to fix tomorrow, right? So your MERL has to be designed, so your monitoring, evaluation, learning modules have to be designed to be predictive in nature and not reflectionary in nature. And I think that's the question I'd like to ask all of you as well. go back and look at how you're measuring your programs currently. That'll help you. So on the next slide, if you go, here are some of the tracks, metrics that we use. Please feel free to screenshot this, or you'll get the slides as well. But we look at these kind of metrics that help us tell, how the startups are improving rather than just being merely participatory, right? All of this was designed from a perspective of how investors look at it, because we ourselves are looking at it. If we have to put our money on the table, we're going to look at these questions very hard, right? Next question. Next slide, please. So this is my last slide. These are 10 practical actions you can do. I'm not going to go through each of them, but you've heard me talk about this throughout, right? So when we recently wrapped up we launched our second cohort for the Seed Inclusion program in Jakarta just a month ago. And it was this time, one of the founders actually told me that this is the first program where he did not feel like he had to catch up, right? Not the best program, not the most inspiring program, just a program where they didn't have to catch up, right? That hit me harder than any KPI that I could hear, right? Because in the end, that is what inclusion really is. It's about helping people. It's not about helping people run faster. It's about ensuring that people fixing the track so that nobody starts 20 meters behind, right? So my parting message to all of you is, let's stop designing program systems that make people catch up. Let's design systems where it meets people where they are and then lift them to where they can be. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom, for the brilliant presentation with a lot of practical tips. There are many parts that resonated with me, but if I start talking about it, I'll take up a lot of time. But just want to say that as soon as this session is over, we will be sharing this entire presentation, combined presentation of Rashi's, Bala's, Shamha, and yours in the Andy Global channel, so that, because we ourselves have a lot to learn from all of this, even sharing it with our other ESOs that are part of our scale cohort. Yeah, over for a short question and answer with Tom.
Either I was super, super clear in my presentation or nothing was understood. Either is fine. It's totally all right, but it's just learning to know which is which.
Or maybe if I can ask a question. Yeah, so I think,
Sure, Rashi.
yeah, so I think one of the slides to remember was maybe after a program, there is a clear pathway of, a continuum of conversation. So for example, and I've seen this and I've heard this question myself a lot of times, is that there's already limitations to, for example, if it's a donor organization that's opening a TOR for 1 year, and then sometimes institutions do not find that liberty or the flexibility to sort of have that post-event time frame. So how do you negotiate? So for instance, there's someone who wants you to do a 1-year project, but for you envision something much more than that. So how do you create that timeline that is both beneficial to you, to also the program that you're doing, and also is quite negotiable? So how do we do that?
Good question, Rashi. And I think it's important to kind of understand our place as ESOs first, right? A lot of donors, they operate from a place where they have fractional information of what's needed on the ground. And they recognize that. Most donors recognize that and say, and often come in saying, hey, we're not experts. We have a vision. We want to implement something. Can you guide us in that process? Unfortunately, for many ESOs, what happens, and I've noticed this, is that we look at an RFP or we look at a donor engagement as just being, yes, we will do whatever you ask of us because we really need the money on this, right? I think it's important to take a step back and really have a dialogue with the donor. That's what we do, right? We have a dialogue with the donor saying, from our research, this is everything that we know about working with this stakeholder or working with this community or working with this region. This is what they really need, right? And what you're offering basically covers 1/3 of what they really need. How flexible are you in for us to be working creatively with the budgets to be able to extend this? Sometimes donors do have their own limitations because they want to exhaust a program before a financial year or their planned budgetary years. And in those cases, you really don't have much leeway to do. But it's important to actually have that conversation with the donor and tell them that really giving the opportunity to create post-program support is what will create long-term sustainability rather than just creating great optics for them, right? And that needs to be a shift. And I know it sounds simple when I say it, but you'll be surprised how many ESOs just say yes to what any donor asks and just says, we will fulfill every one of your demands, no questions asked. Right? Sometimes it's important to let the donor know, saying, hey, we're on the ground, trust us. This is all our experience. We're happy to open our network so that you can validate it and understand further as well. And that's when a donor really values the relationship. I hope that answers the question, Rashi.
Yeah, absolutely. And I hope that, this is because sometimes we see that there's a lot of pressure from the donor's end and a lot of inflexibility. But I do wish that a lot of donors do understand that, to trust the local implementing partners as such. But thank you so much.
No problem. But I think that's exactly where agencies like ANDE come into play, right? Because
Absolutely.
ANDE creates that platform for a lot of ESOs. Vinita and Pop, I'm shamelessly plugging you guys in, but it's actually the truth, right? ANDE represents those voices to donors. And I think that's why it's important for all of us who work on both the investment side as well as the ESO sides to really let ANDE know so that they can champion these needs to the donors and saying, hey, stop the old world thinking of take a pot of money and do good and send me pictures, but rather get into more participatory engagement so that it's more transformational, catalytic, rather than just, fit the bill, what's needed. So, Andy, over to you guys to do something about it.
Yeah. We have a donor convening coming up. Joy is also here. And I think she is taking note. Yeah.
Perfect.
Any other questions? Otherwise, we'll just quickly discuss the next steps. Yeah, so we did a mid-level evaluation, and some of the comments we got required more interaction, and also have asked for a toolkit. So we are happy to announce that it is a toolkit is in progress. It will be Creative Commons, everybody can access coming in accessible formats. You can also translate to local languages. We are working on it, and we are planning to launch it in March 2026. And then with regard to interaction, we have plans of setting up a matchmaking session where people interested in gender inclusion can discuss, and people interested in disability inclusion or people who are more interested in fundraising, they can discuss that as well. We recognize that the breakout room approach that we used to follow probably was not very conducive in having in-depth conversation. And lastly, this has been an amazing session, even though Shamha and Bala are not here. I would like to say that we are really grateful to them. And Rashi and Tom, we feel that we had not been able to give adequate coverage because it happened a bit, our handles were busy with the South Asia convening and all of that. But anyway, now that we have the recording, and we will ensure that this gets adequate positive and publicity. Yeah. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Thank
Bob, anything you
you.
would like?
No, I just want to say thank you to everyone as well. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.